Hello, everybody. I guess we could say Happy New Year, at least New Year, as we usher in 2024. Here in Israel, Palestine, of course, it's not an easy year to go into with the Gaza conflict, if you want to call it, the genocidal assault on Gaza. That's really overshadowing everything, and in fact, has really become a global issue, I think. And that's what I'd like to talk about today in the January kind of update of where we are and what we're thinking about in ICAHD. I think there's almost a consensus in world public opinion, certainly among the peoples of the world, not among governments, of course, where you have that disconnect, that what Israel is doing in Gaza really is genocidal. And it's not only a slogan or a term, but genocide, has a very specific legal meaning. Unfortunately, not all the meaning of genocide that Raphael Lemkin, who was a Polish Jewish lawyer who went through the Holocaust, came to the United States. And he was the lawyer, Raphael Lemkin, that really shepherded the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide through the United Nations system. There's a book I really recommend that you all read by Samantha Power called In the Shadow of Ravens, The Traumatic History of Genocide and Raphael Lemkin's Fight Against It, which is really a very good book. And Lemkin, wanted both the physical aspects of genocide, the killings of people, but also, there's other aspects of genocide, which is cultural, or denying a group the inability to reproduce itself, to really kill a group culturally, if not physically. And that part of the Geneva of genocide, his concept of genocide, was not accepted by the UN. So let me just go into that a little bit, because I think it's still relevant. Certainly in our public statements about genocide, we have to take into account, I believe, Lemkin's wider vision of what genocide really is, and not only the more limited legal definition. Now, the legal definition, again, focuses on the physical aspects of genocide. So it defines genocide as any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. And then it gives 5 things I'll talk about in 1 second. But I want to just dwell for a second on this term intent, that I think is really not a good part of the Geneva of the Genocide Convention, and in fact really gets into this whole issue of terrorism and how the states are able to use state terrorism while of course including genocide, while of course completely delegitimizing any other form of what they call terrorism of non-state actors. Because what states have done, and Netanyahu has actually been a leading figure in this, is to seize on this word intent. So the idea then is that only non-state actors, let's say in our case Hamas in Gaza, only then they can become terrorists. Why? Because they attack civilians with the intent of killing them. That's where the intent comes in, and it sounds rational. It sounds okay, except when you come to states. Now, state terrorism is infinitely worse than non-state terrorism. If you're talking about killing innocent people, there's a fellow named, you look up his book, R.J. Rummel, Rummel, who is an American professor who wrote a very interesting book called Death by Government. And he calculated that over the entire course of the 20th century, about 170,000 innocent people were killed by what we call terrorists, non-state actors like Hamas, which is a lot of people. I mean, nobody can say killing 170,000 people is good in any way. But in terms of scale, he calculated that over the course of the 20th century, 212 million people, innocent civilians, were killed by states. So states are actually much more culpable in terms of terrorism. State terrorism is much worse than what we usually associate with terrorism, which is non-state terrorism. So that what Israel has done with Netanyahu and other states have adopted this is say, well, states can't be terrorists because we don't intend to kill civilians. You see, civilians, I mean, because states have, you see, they exploit this. States have the exclusive right to wage war, to raise armies, to attack, right? That's a state prerogative. Non-state actors don't have that right. So when Hamas resists or attacks or does terrorist acts or does any kind of armed resistance, that's considered terrorism. That's illegal. It's a crime, the crime of genocide, the crime of terrorism. That's the language the UN uses because they intend to do it. But because states have the right to wage war and attack, innocent people that are killed are simply collateral damage, right? Because the state did not intend to kill them. And therefore, the state can't be a terrorist. So when, for example, you take the Jabalia refugee camp in Gaza, you know, and Israel drops a 2,000-ton bomb on this crowded refugee camp to kill one Hamas official, as it did in the middle of January, and killed hundreds of people, wounded thousands of people, created craters in the middle of this camp, that was not terrorism. That was not state terrorism. Why? Because all those people were collateral damage. Israel didn't intend to kill them. Now, obviously, you know, maybe it didn't intend to kill them, but it was so obvious that you're going to drop a 2,000-ton bomb on a refugee camp, that's what's going to happen. And that's where states get away with it. They get away with murder because of this language. So the problem in the Genocide Convention, plus other the usual definitions of terrorism that you hear, is this issue of intent, because that allows states to get off the hook because they can claim they didn't intend. This is simply collateral damage, the killing of innocent people. Okay, but all right, let's leave that now. Now, what are the 5 things that then comprise genocide? The killing of members of a group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. That begins to get into the cultural genocidal part, because you could certainly say that Israel, by denying humanitarian aid to Palestinians in Gaza, even if they're not physically killing them, are creating conditions of life calculated to bring about the physical destruction of the Palestinian people, in part because you're denying them food, you're denying them medicine, you're denying them water, and so on. 4th, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. And finally, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. That's something, for example, that Russia is doing in the Ukraine. But, and I just want to take another minute or so to read to you what wasn't included in the Genocide Convention that Raphael Lemkin wanted included, because this has to do with the psychological and cultural acts of genocide that, again, were not included, but I think we should include them in terms of our political work in all our discussions. And he says 2 more things from his point of view make up genocide. One is that he says, I'm quoting Lemkin, Genocide does not necessarily mean the immediate destruction of a nation, except when accomplished by mass killings of all the members of the nation. It's not only, one act always. It is intended rather to signify a coordinated plan of different actions aiming at the destruction of essential foundations of the life of national groups, with the aim of annihilating the groups themselves. And this is where I think you could look at what Israel has done over the last 75 years since 1948 as a process of genocide that we included in our ICAHD statement calling for the end of genocide in Gaza that you can find on our website. The idea that it's not only Gaza is the act of genocide, but if you put it in the context of this process of the last 75 years throughout historic Palestine, you come to this coordinated plan of destruction. Lemkin goes on. The objections of such a plan. Now, again, think of what Israel has done since 1948. The objectives of such a plan would be disintegration of the political and social institutions, of culture, language, national feelings, religion, and the economic existence of national groups, and the destruction of the personal security, liberty, health, dignity, and even the lives of the individuals belonging to such groups. Genocide is directed against the national group as an entity, and the actions involved are directed against individuals, not in their individual capacity, but as members of a national group. And then he goes on, briefly, he says, genocide has two phases. One, destruction of the national pattern of the oppressed group. The other, the imposition of the national pattern of the oppressor. So here's another thing that we have to look at in terms of Israel over Palestine. And that is, not only did Zionism come with the intent of replacing, and to do that, it had to destroy the Palestinian people. It had to displace them, take them off their land, physically remove them from the country. More than 80% of the Palestinians were driven out in 1948 in the Nakba. And basically, by destroying more than 530 villages, taking the agricultural land and so on, Israel was removing the ability of the Palestinian people to reproduce itself as a people. So that's the destruction of the national pattern of the oppressed group, its language, its culture, its national feelings, its institutions, its economic existence, and so on. But then what Zionism in Israel did, was, as Lemkin says, to impose the national pattern of the oppressor. Because the idea was not simply to get rid of Palestinians, but to replace Palestine with a Jewish Israel, to transform an Arab country into a Jewish country. And then, so to do that, it had to completely erase the presence of the Palestinians, historically, their heritage, even deny their existence as a people, which Israel has done until today, and then replace it with Jewish culture, Jewish villages, the kibbutzim, Jewish cities, changing the names of every river, hill, valley in the country from Arabic to Hebrew, right? And to replace the name of the country. So if you go to your travel agent, go try to buy a ticket to Palestine. There is no place of Palestine where airlines fly to. You only fly to Israel. And that really matches the second phase of how Lemkin defines genocide, which is the imposition of the national pattern of the oppressor. This imposition, in turn, may be made upon the oppressed population, which is allowed to remain, or upon the territory alone after removal of the population and the colonization by the oppressor's own nationals. So it doesn't mean that all the people have to leave. There are, half the population of Palestine today, from the river to the sea, is Palestinians. although they have no, the vast majority have no citizenship, but they're here. Nevertheless, genocide can take place even when they're present by removing any ability of them to reproduce themselves as a national kind of a group and simply reduce them to physical existence. So that as we're going into this, into the South African initiated trial of Israel for genocide, and on Thursday, the arguments are going to begin in The Hague in the International Court of Justice. As we go into that, there's one practical result that could come out immediately if the judges agree. And that is that the court has the authority to issue an immediate order for a ceasefire. They could stop the fighting tomorrow, the court, because part of the Geneva Convention, the Genocide Convention, is the prevention of genocide, not only the punishment of genocide. So the court has a responsibility even before it decides that this is genocidal, which is a process that could take years in court. Even before that, if there's a suspicion this is genocide, it has the obligation to issue this order, and Israel, as a signatory of the Genocide Convention, has a responsibility to stop the fighting. So this is going to be a good test of whether international law really has any clout, any enforcement powers, or whether it's simply declarations. Can states thumb their noses at the International Court of Justice? Some have, like the United States. We'll see. Biden keeps talking all the time about the rules-based, or rights-based system of international rules and law. Well, let's see. This is the test. What's coming down? The problem now, to finish this thought process, I think the problem we have with states, and you could see it with Israel over Palestine, is that despite international law, despite genocide conventions and so on, there is no effective mechanism for enforcing international law on states. It just, and most international laws are enforced through the Security Council. So either the United States has a veto power for countries it wants to protect, like Israel, or Russia or China have veto powers over the countries they want to protect. So there is no effective enforcement mechanism in the international system for enforcing international law, and so states can really thumb their noses at it because there's nothing to constrain them. What that means then is that really we, the people, are the only force in the world that's able to somehow stand up to states, to hold them accountable, to expose what they're doing, because their own legal systems, their own political systems, and the international system will not do that. They all are intended to protect the state itself in things like genocide and state terrorism and oppression and colonialism, and so on. And that's where I think groups like our group, I have to say that I think ICAHD, our organization, the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, has really tried to fill that vacuum. There aren't many groups, to tell you the truth, that we can really work with. Most groups are solidarity groups, that do symbolic things that are important, and education and so on, but they stop short of advocating a political solution or a plan or forcing the states some political solution on the states. Or you have NGOs that are working in a humanitarian way. We have protests like the great protests in London and Washington and other cities of the world over what Israel's done in Gaza. We have activism, we have movements, but what we really need, and I think this is where ICAHD plays a role and it can be a model, are political organizations, Israeli, Palestinian, and others that begin to formulate and promote a political program, because we can punish Israel for genocide, but the genocide is going to happen. And unless we stop it effectively, in other words, we, the people, as much as dispowered as we are, we're the only force that can somehow constrain the states. And I ask all of us, I guess, to join with ICAHD. Certainly, I'd ask you to help support our activities, because we're one of the few organizations trying to magnify the critical Israeli voice that's working with Palestinians in order to formulate a political resolution of this whole thing, which in our view is the establishment of a single democratic state over all of historic Palestine that we've talked about before. So at least I'd ask you to join ICAHD. Look at our website, ICAHD.org. Join us. If you can, support us financially, which is very important. But I think it's not only ICAHD, but support other organizations that are political. Our partner in the Palestinian realm is the One Democratic State campaign, but there are others as well. The point, I guess, the bottom line for this is that even though we have genocide conventions, even though we have international laws, even though we have laws even that protect the rights of people like Hamas or like the Palestinians to resist oppression, there is no enforcement mechanism, and therefore it does fall upon us, the people, if we organize and become more political, to become that counterweight to the to states in a way that the UN and the international system and state governments themselves have failed to do. So that's my thought for January. I hope I didn't go on too long, but I think it's an appropriate comment in terms of going into the genocide trial that is now coming up before the International Court of Justice. So thanks for listening, and see you next month. Bye.